Have you ever felt invisible? What happens when the person who promised to love you forever discards you for a shinier model, convinced you were nothing more than a stepping stone? For 7 years, Claire Holloway was that stepping stone for her ambitious husband, Damien. He called her his quiet harbour, his support system, and then he called her dowdy, uninspired, and left her for a woman he could show off. Tonight, he's walking into the city's most exclusive gala with his mistress on his arm, ready to claim his place among the elite. But he's about to discover that the woman he threw away was never a stepping stone. She was the entire mountain. Stay with us for a story of devastating betrayal, hidden power, and the epic downfall of a man who fatally underestimated the woman he scorned. The silence in their minimalist steel and glass apartment was the loudest sound Claire had ever heard. It was a cavernous, echoing thing that swallowed the gentle hum of the sub-zero fridge and the distant moan of Manhattan traffic. For 7 years, she had curated this silence, polished it, and presented it to her husband, Damien Archer, as a gift upon his return from the battlefield of Wall Street. It was his sanctuary, his quiet harbour, as he so often called her, a place to recharge before the next conquest. But tonight, the harbour was being decommissioned, its lighthouse extinguished with a few callous words. "It's not that I don't love you, Claire," Damien had said, his back to her as he adjusted the knot of his Brioni tie in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights glittered behind him like a crown he was about to claim. "I do. I always will, in a way. You've been essential." Essential. The word landed like a stone in her gut. Not cherished, not beloved. Essential. Like a good accountant or a reliable car. She stood by the kitchen island, her hands gripping the cold marble edge. She was still wearing the simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans she'd had on when she was planning his dinner. A braised short rib recipe that took 6 hours. A perfect meal he would not be eating. Then why, Damien? If this isn't about love, what is it about? He finally turned, his face a mask of regret so practiced it looked genuine. At 34, Damien was ruthlessly handsome, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a jawline that could cut glass. He had weaponized that charm to build his boutique investment firm, Archer Capital, from the ground up. Claire had been there for every step, organizing his investor dinners, proofreading his prospectuses until 3 a.m., and talking him down from ledges of panic only she was allowed to see. "It's about trajectory," he said, his voice soft, as if explaining a complex financial instrument to a child. "The man I am now, the man I am becoming, requires a different kind of partner, someone who shines, who commands a room. Sienna does that." Sienna Reed, the impossibly chic, raven-haired VP of marketing from a rival firm. Claire had seen her at company events, a flash of red lipstick and a laugh that seemed to draw all the light in the room toward her. Claire had told herself she wasn't the jealous type. Now she realized she had just been naive. "And I don't," Claire stated, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. Damien had the decency to look away. "You're comfortable, Claire. You're my home. But you can't build an empire from home. You're for the before, not the after." He walked over to her, his hand hovering over her arm before he seemed to think better of it. "The papers are drawn up. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. I've been more than generous. You'll never have to worry about anything." The patronizing kindness was worse than any cruelty. He was monetizing their marriage, signing a check to close the account on 7 years of her life. He thought money could solve the gaping wound he was carving into her soul. She finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "Did you ever love me, Damien? Or was I just the first round of seed funding for the man you wanted to be?" For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face. Irritation. He hated being seen, truly seen. "That's unfair. We were happy, but people outgrow each other. It's no one's fault." He checked his Cartier watch. "I have to go. The benefactor's gala. It's a big night for the firm." "Of course. The Gala, the glittering pinnacle of New York's philanthropic scene, a place where billion-dollar deals were sketched on cocktail napkins. He was going with Sienna. He was launching his new life tonight, and the first order of business was jettisoning his old one. He bent to kiss her cheek, a gesture so automatic and devoid of warmth it made her flinch. "Be well, Claire," he murmured, and then he was gone. The click of the lock echoed in the silence. She stood there for a long time, the smell of his Tom Ford cologne hanging in the air like a ghost. She looked around the apartment he was leaving her, an apartment she had decorated in shades of greige and charcoal because he'd said it was soothing and sophisticated. She had sanded down all her own colourful edges to become his quiet, neutral backdrop, and now he had simply painted over her. She walked on numb legs into their bedroom. His closet was half empty. He had been planning this for weeks, moving his life out piece by piece, while she was busy planning his menus and managing his social calendar. The betrayal was so deep and methodical, it stole her breath. Slumping onto the edge of their bed, the bed where he'd sworn he loved her just last week, she felt a despair so profound it was almost paralyzing. He was right. She didn't shine. She was the support structure, the invisible scaffolding that held up his magnificent facade. And now that the building was complete, the scaffolding was being torn down. Who was she without him? She had poured so much of herself into the vessel of his ambition that she wasn't sure what was left. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. With a sigh, she picked it up. A number she didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. Reluctantly, she answered. "Claire?" a crisp, professional voice asked. "This is Jonathan from Mr. Sterling's office." Her breath hitched. Mr. Sterling, her father. "Yes, he's been trying to reach you. He asked me to convey a message. He said, and I quote, 'The storm has passed. It's time to come home.'" Tears, hot and sudden, pricked her eyes. She hadn't spoken to her father, Arthur Sterling, in over a year. He had never approved of Damien, calling him a man with a hollow core. Their last conversation had been a terrible argument, with Claire defending her husband, her life, her choices. Her father had warned her that Damien saw her as a convenience, not a partner. She had called him a cynical old man. "He also said to tell you," Jonathan continued, his tone softening slightly, "that your seat on the board is waiting and your dress for the benefactor's gala has arrived." Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. The benefactor's gala. Tonight. "And Claire?" Jonathan added. "He said to remember who you are." She hung up the phone, the words echoing in the crushing silence. Remember who you are. For 7 years she had been Mrs. Damien Archer, a dowdy, supportive wife who organized dinner parties and wore sensible shoes. But before that, she was Claire Sterling, and the Sterlings didn't just attend galas. They owned the rooms they walked into. A slow, cold fury began to replace the despair. Damien thought he was launching his empire tonight. He thought he had discarded his quiet, unremarkable wife for a woman who could light up a room. He had no idea. He was about to walk into the very center of her world, and she wasn't just going to shine, she was going to burn it all down. The Grand Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a universe of its own, a swirling galaxy of diamonds, couture, and ambition. Power wasn't just displayed here, it was performed. Damien Archer moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a man who knew he belonged. With Sienna Reed on his arm, he felt invincible. She was a vision in a crimson backless gown, her laughter like music, drawing gazes from every corner of the room. This, he thought with a surge of satisfaction, was what a partner should be. An asset. A reflection of his own brilliance. "Darling, that's Ronan Hastings over there," Sienna murmured, her red lacquered nails gently squeezing his arm. "He controls the largest tech fund in the valley. We need a word with him." "All in good time," Damien said, smiling graciously at a passing acquaintance. "Tonight is about cementing our presence. We're not here to chase. We're here to be courted. He felt a profound sense of rightness, of destiny unfolding. Leaving Claire had been a necessary amputation. It was painful, yes, but it was to save the whole. He pictured her in their old apartment, probably curled up with a book, nursing a cup of tea. Predictable, safe, utterly devoid of the electricity that crackled in this room. He felt a pang, not of guilt, but of pity. She just wasn't built for this world. He and Sienna found their table near the front, a prime piece of real estate that had cost his firm $250,000. It was an investment in perception. He was Damien Archer, the man of the moment, and this was his coronation. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, the crystal cool against his fingers. Everything was perfect. And then the atmosphere in the hall shifted. It began as a subtle murmur near the grand entrance, a ripple of whispers that grew into a wave of hushed excitement. Heads turned, conversations lulled. Damien followed the collective gaze, mildly annoyed at the interruption. A politician, perhaps? A reclusive celebrity? Then he saw her. For a moment, his brain refused to process the image. The woman framed by the grand archway was a stranger, an ethereal creature of impossible poise and beauty. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that seemed to drink the light, cascading around her figure in a way that was both elegant and fiercely sensual. Around her neck was a collar of sapphires and diamonds, so magnificent they looked like captured stars. The famous sterling sapphires, a set he'd only ever seen in photos from history books. Her honey blonde hair, which Claire always wore in a simple, sensible bun, was styled in soft, glamorous waves that fell over one shoulder. Her face, the face he knew so intimately, was transformed. The subtle makeup highlighted the sharp intelligence in her blue eyes and the resolute curve of her mouth. She wasn't smiling. She was observing, her expression one of cool, regal authority. This wasn't Claire Holloway, his dowdy ex-wife. This was a queen surveying her court. Damien's champagne glass trembled in his hand. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, coiled in his stomach. It couldn't be. Sienna leaned in, her eyes wide. My God, who is that? I've never seen her before. Before Damien could answer, the evening's host, the venerable Philip Cartwright, stepped to the microphone on the stage. His voice boomed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so honored to have with us tonight a representative from one of our most generous and long-standing patrons. A family whose commitment to the arts has shaped the cultural landscape of this city for a century. A spotlight found the woman at the entrance. She didn't flinch. She simply tilted her chin, her gaze sweeping across the room, across the sea of stunned faces, until it found his. Her eyes held his for a single, devastating second. There was no pain in them, no anger, just a terrifying, glacial calm. Philip Cartwright beamed. It is my distinct pleasure to announce the creation of the new Sterling Wing for Contemporary Art, made possible by a landmark endowment. Please join me in welcoming the newest member of the Sterling Global Holdings Board of Directors, Ms. Claire Sterling. The name hit Damien like a physical blow. Sterling. The room erupted in applause. The name Sterling was legend in New York. It was old money, real power, a dynasty that operated in a stratosphere so high Damien could only dream of reaching it. Arthur Sterling was a kingmaker, a titan of industry who could make or break fortunes with a single phone call. And Claire was his daughter. The realization crashed over him, a tidal wave of horrific understanding, her quiet trips to visit her father upstate, her simple, unbranded clothing, her utter lack of interest in the trappings of wealth he so desperately craved. It hadn't been a lack of sophistication, it had been the complete, unadulterated confidence of someone who had never needed to prove a thing. She wasn't just from money. She was from the kind of money that didn't need to be spoken of. He had called her dowdy. He had called her simple. He had pitied her. He, a man who clawed his way into a world she was born to rule. Sterling? Sienna breathed beside him, her voice barely a whisper. She was staring at Claire, then back at Damien, the pieces clicking into place in her sharp mind. The colour drained from her face. "You were married to Claire Sterling?" Damien couldn't speak. His throat was tight, his blood roaring in his ears. He watched, paralysed, as Arthur Sterling himself emerged from the wings, a lion of a man with a shock of white hair and eyes as blue and sharp as his daughter's. He offered Claire his arm, and together they moved through the room. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. They weren't just guests, they were royalty. Claire didn't look at him again. She didn't have to. Every step she took was a judgment. Every deferential nod she received from men Damien had spent years trying to impress was a nail in his coffin. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had, with his own breathtaking arrogance, severed his connection to a source of power he never even knew he had. He had traded a goddess for a glittering trinket. The woman he had called his quiet harbour had just revealed herself to be the entire unforgiving ocean. And he was nothing but a fool in a sinking boat. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal, suffocating haze for Damien. The air, once crackling with opportunity, now felt thick with his own failure. The fawning smiles that had been directed at him just an hour ago were now aimed with laser-like intensity at the Sterling table. He and Sienna sat in a bubble of stunned silence, the lavish floral centerpiece between them feeling like a funeral wreath. He watched Claire. He couldn't stop. He observed her as one might study a predator, trying to understand its nature now that it had revealed its teeth. She was a natural. She moved from conversation to conversation with an effortless grace, her smile warm but measured, her handshake firm. She spoke with Ronan Hastings, the tech titan, who listened with rapt attention. She shared a quiet laugh with the mayor. She was not playing a part. She was inhabiting a role she was born for, one she had merely kept in storage for 7 years. For him, the psychological torment of that realization was exquisite. He had chided her for not being more ambitious, for not wanting to build an empire with him. It was like criticizing the sun for not trying harder to be bright. Her world, her empire, had been there all along, patient and silent, waiting for her to return. "You have to go talk to her," Sienna hissed, her voice a low, urgent tremor. The shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, pragmatic fear. Her association with Damien, which hours ago was a rocket ship, was now a liability. "Fix this, Damien." "Fix this?" he shot back, his voice ragged. "How exactly? Do you have any idea who her father is? Arthur Sterling could have my firm delisted with a phone call before his dessert arrives." "Then you should have thought of that before you paraded me in here after leaving his daughter," she snapped, her carefully constructed composure cracking. "You told me she was a nobody, a sweet, simple girl from a middle-class family." "That's what I thought she was," he insisted, rubbing his temples. A vicious headache was beginning to pound behind his eyes. "She never said a word, 7 years, and not one word." That was the most galling part. The sheer, magnificent discipline of her deception. Or was it just her reality? He had been so blinded by his own narrative, so convinced of his superiority, that he had never bothered to look deeper. He saw a plain brown wrapper and never imagined it might contain the crown jewels. Finally, inevitably, their paths crossed. Claire was making her way toward the exit, her father's hand resting protectively on her back. Damien stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. He had to say something. What? He didn't know. But silence was an admission of defeat. "Claire," he said, his voice hoarse. She stopped, turning to face him. Up close, the effect was even more staggering. The sterling sapphires glittered with a cold fire, but her eyes were colder. Arthur Sterling's gaze was a physical weight, pinning Damien in place with unconcealed disdain. "Damien," she acknowledged, her tone perfectly neutral, as if addressing a distant acquaintance. I didn't know," he stammered, feeling like a fool. It was the lamest, most inadequate excuse, but it was the only truth he had. A small, mirthless smile touched her lips. "No, you didn't." You never asked." She paused, letting the simple indictment hang in the air. "You were so busy telling me who I was, you never thought to wonder who I might be on my own." The calm, surgical precision of her words was devastating. There was no shouting, no tears, no drama. That would have been easier to handle. This was an execution. "Claire, we need to talk," he pleaded, a desperate edge creeping into his voice. "This is a mistake." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "A mistake? On whose part? I feel for the first time in a very long time that I am not making a mistake at all." She adjusted the silk of her gown. "You told me to find my own way. I believe you said I was for the before, not the after. Well, welcome to the after, Damien. I hope you enjoy the view." Arthur Sterling stepped forward slightly. "My daughter has a long day tomorrow. Board meeting at 8. We'll be going." He gave Damien a final, dismissive look. "Archer, try to stay out of our way." And with that, they were gone, leaving Damien standing in the middle of the grand hall, the murmurs of the crowd rushing in to fill the void. He was no longer the center of attention. He was the subject of gossip, the fool in a cautionary tale that would be recounted over brunch for weeks to come. Sienna had vanished from his side, already distancing herself, a smart player cutting her losses. He stumbled back to his table, sinking into his chair. He had sought power, status, and a partner who could amplify his ascent. In his arrogant quest, he had discarded the single greatest asset he ever possessed, and in doing so had made an enemy of a titan. He looked across the room and saw Ronan Hastings in conversation with another investor. Hastings glanced over at Damien, his expression unreadable, before turning his back. The courting was over. The chill had set in. Damien Archer had walked into the gala that night, believing he was being crowned a king. He was leaving a pariah, haunted by the icy wake of the woman he had so carelessly thrown away. The psychological conflict was just beginning. He had built his entire identity on the foundation of his own perceived brilliance and control. Tonight, that foundation had been dynamited, and he was in freefall, with no idea where he would land. The week following the gala was a masterclass in slow, agonizing irrelevance. Damien's phone, usually a constant symphony of calls and messages from investors, journalists, and market movers, fell eerily silent. Meetings were mysteriously rescheduled. A major deal he had been cultivating for months with a tech startup suddenly went cold, the CEO no longer returning his calls. It wasn't an overt attack. It was a quiet, suffocating shift in the climate. The air around Archer Capital had become toxic. Damien spent his days pacing his office, the panoramic view of the city he had once found inspiring, now feeling like a constant reminder of the world he was being pushed out of. He was a ghost at the feast. His name, once a rising star in financial columns, was now only mentioned in hushed, speculative tones in the gossip pages linked to the Sterling bombshell. He had become a human interest story, a joke. Meanwhile, Claire Sterling was everywhere. She was photographed leaving the Sterling Tower, looking polished and formidable in a tailored pantsuit. She was quoted in the Wall Street Journal about Sterling Global's new green energy initiative. She was profiled in a glossy magazine feature titled The Sterling Scion, A New Era of Power, which conveniently omitted any mention of her 7-year marriage, reducing his entire existence to a footnote she had chosen to erase. The power imbalance was absolute. He had no access, no leverage. He tried calling her a dozen times. Each call went straight to voicemail. He sent texts, long, rambling messages that veered wildly from pleading apologies to bitter accusations. They were met with digital silence. He was shouting into a void. This calculated detachment was a form of psychological warfare she was waging, and it was brutally effective. By refusing to engage, she was communicating that he was no longer important enough for a fight. His frustration curdled into a dangerous obsession. He started digging, using his research skills to learn everything he could about the life she had hidden from him. He discovered the truth. Claire had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton with a degree in finance. Before she met him, she had been managing a multi-million-dollar philanthropic fund for the Sterling Foundation. She had stepped away from it all the year they got married, telling her father she wanted a normal life. The knowledge was a fresh stab of betrayal. She wasn't just an heiress, she was a brilliant financial mind in her own right. She had played the part of the supportive, non-threatening wife for him, deliberately dimming her own light so his could shine brighter. The narrative he had constructed, that he had elevated her, that she was lucky to have him, was a pathetic fiction. The opposite was true. She had condescended to live in his world, and he had been too arrogant to even notice. The pressure began to manifest in his professional life. During a tense quarterly review with his remaining partners, his focus shattered. "Damien, where are the projections for the Q4 fund?" asked his senior partner, a shrewd older man named George. Damien stared blankly. "They're being finalized. They were due last Tuesday," George said, his tone sharp. "Your head isn't in the game. This situation with your ex-wife is becoming a serious distraction. Investors are asking questions. They want to know why you weren't transparent about your connection to the Sterlings. It makes you look either incompetent or deceitful." "It was a private matter," Damien snapped, his temper flaring. "Nothing is private when it involves $100 billion dynasty," George retorted, slapping a file on the table. "We're bleeding, Damien, and it's your wound." The confrontation left him rattled. He returned to his office, the walls feeling like they were closing in. He looked at the photo on his desk. It was of him and Sienna at a charity event a few months ago, both of them beaming. He picked it up and stared at her face. Sienna, who had disappeared from his life as completely as Claire had. She had played her own game and knew when to fold. In a fit of rage and desperation, he hurled the photo frame against the wall, where it shattered, sending glass skittering across the floor. He was alone, stripped of his brilliant partner, his supportive wife, and his professional reputation. He had flown too close to the sun, only to discover the sun was the woman he'd left behind, and she had decided to burn him. Across town, in a sprawling corner office overlooking Central Park, Claire Sterling sat at a mahogany desk that had belonged to her grandfather. The view was breathtaking, but her focus was on the documents spread before her. She was chairing her first major acquisition meeting in an hour. Her father walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Burning the midnight oil already?" he asked, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Just getting prepared," she said, accepting the cup with a grateful smile. "There's no room for error." "You're ready," he said simply. He sat in the leather chair opposite her desk. "I spoke with Philip Cartwright this morning. The Gala is still the talk of the town." He paused. "And so is your ex-husband." Claire's posture stiffened slightly. "Is he?" "His firm is struggling. Word is, he's become volatile, unreliable." Arthur watched her carefully. "This is the part of the game you were always hesitant about, Claire. The consequences, the fallout." She looked out the window at the vast, glittering expanse of the city. "He made his choices, Dad. He wanted a partner who could command a room. He just didn't realize I could command one he wasn't invited into." Her voice was steady, but inside, a quiet war was being waged. This wasn't just about business. It was deeply, painfully personal. Every professional victory felt like a vindication, but it didn't erase the sting of his betrayal. She was rebuilding her life on the rubble of their marriage, and she knew the ghost of Damien Archer would haunt the construction site for a long time. She had shown him her power, but the hidden motive was far more complex than revenge. It was about survival. It was about proving to the one person who still mattered in the equation, herself, that she was more than the reflection in a man's eye. She was the source of the light. Damien's world had shrunk to the 4 walls of his office and the suffocating luxury of his penthouse. He was a man under siege, and the enemy was an phantom, the Sterling name, whispered in boardrooms and trading floors, a ghost that chilled every deal he tried to make. His paranoia began to fester, blooming in the dark corners of his mind. Every unanswered email, every cancelled meeting he attributed to the invisible hand of Arthur Sterling, orchestrating his downfall at Claire's behest. He envisioned them laughing about it over dinner in some palatial estate. The psychological pressure was immense. He wasn't just losing business, he was losing his sense of self. His identity was inextricably linked to his success, his reputation as a brilliant, self-made man. As that identity cracked, so did his composure. He became short-tempered with his staff, his commands sharp and laced with an undercurrent of desperation. He obsessed over market news, searching for any mention of Sterling Global, interpreting every move they made as a strategic attack against him. His relationship with Sienna had been the first casualty. She had called him a week after the gala, her voice cool and distant. "I can't do this, Damien," she had said without preamble. "Can't do what? We haven't even spoken," he'd countered, bewildered. Us. My career is built on my reputation, being associated with the man who publicly humiliated a Sterling. It's poison. I'm sorry. You're on your own. The click of the phone had been the final closing of a door. He realized with a sickening clarity that Sienna had never been interested in him. She was interested in his trajectory, the power he projected. The moment that power was revealed to be an illusion, she was gone. She was the pragmatist he had claimed he wanted, and her pragmatism had led her straight out of his life. He was alone with the consequences of his choices. This isolation drove him deeper into his obsession with Claire. He started looking through old photo albums, searching for clues he'd missed. There she was, smiling in a simple sundress on a trip to the Hamptons, a trip he now realized that was likely to her family's oceanfront estate. There she was, in a bulky sweater at a ski lodge in Aspen, a lodge that probably had the Sterling name etched into its foundation. He had been a tourist in her life, and she had let him believe he was the guide. The power imbalance he had cherished in their relationship was now inverted with a brutal irony. He had held all the cards, or so he thought. He had controlled their social life, their finances, their future. Now he had nothing, while she held the entire deck. One evening, consumed by a mixture of scotch and self-pity, he did the unthinkable. He went to their old apartment building, the one he had so generously left her. He buzzed the intercom, not knowing what he would even say. A man's voice, clipped and professional, answered, "Yes." "I'm here to see Claire Holloway." "Claire Sterling," Damien corrected, his own name feeling alien on his tongue. "Ms. Sterling no longer resides here. Who is calling?" "It's Damien Archer." A pause. "Please do not contact this number again." The line went dead. She was gone. She had shed every last piece of the life they had built together. He was left clinging to memories she had already discarded. The realization that he was now just a part of her past, a chapter she had closed, was more agonizing than any direct confrontation. Meanwhile, Claire was navigating her own internal conflicts. The corporate world was a battlefield, and while she had the training for it, 7 years of peace had softened her armor. She sat in board meetings where men twice her age tested her, probing for weakness, trying to see if she was merely a figurehead. She had to prove her worth every single day. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling negotiation over a merger, she found her father waiting in her office. He held a small framed photograph. "I thought you might like this for your desk," he said. She took it. It was a picture of her mother, a brilliant and beautiful woman who had passed away when Claire was in college. In the photo, her mother was standing on the deck of a sailboat, her hand on the tiller, laughing into the wind. She looked fearless. "She would be so proud of you," Arthur said softly. "You have her strength, but you also have her heart. Don't let this world harden it, Claire." Claire looked at the photo, then at her father. "I feel like I'm playing a part sometimes, this powerful, untouchable woman, but inside, I'm still the person who cried for a week when he left. And there is nothing wrong with that person, Arthur insisted, his voice firm. Power isn't about being untouchable, it's about being able to touch the world and change it. Don't confuse the armor for the warrior. The pain you feel is real, but it doesn't have to be your master. You are the master of what you build from it. His words settled something in her. She wasn't just reacting to Damien anymore. She was acting for herself, for her family's legacy, for the future she wanted to create. The hidden motive wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. She was reclaiming her name, her intellect, and her spirit. She placed the photo of her mother on her desk, a silent promise. She would be strong, yes, but she would not lose her heart. She would win this war, but she would do it on her own terms, without becoming the kind of person who had broken her in the first place. The cracks in Damien's armor were of his own making, but she was determined that the scars on hers would become a map to a stronger future. Damien's descent accelerated. Archer Capital was hemorrhaging investors. His partners, led by George, staged a coup of sorts, forcing him to take a leave of absence to sort out his personal affairs. The language was corporate, but the meaning was clear. He was being exiled from his own kingdom. The firm he had built, the name he had forged, was being stripped from him. Stripped of his professional purpose, his obsession with Claire became all-consuming. He saw her not as the source of his problems, but as the solution. If he could just get her back, if he could just make her see that he understood now, everything could be fixed. Their union, he reasoned in his increasingly delusional state, was the key to unlocking a level of power he'd never dreamed of. He just had to make her listen. His desperation led him to a reckless gambit. During their marriage, Claire had been working on a passion project, a philanthropic initiative to fund sustainable housing in developing nations. She had discussed a potential partnership with a small but innovative solar technology firm, Solara Innovations. Damien had dismissed it at the time as one of her little hobbies. Now he remembered the name. Through his remaining contacts, he learned that Sterling Global was in the final stages of acquiring Solara, a move that would position them as a major player in the green energy sector. It was Claire's project, her brainchild, and he saw an opening. He still held shares in a few small tech companies, remnants of his glory days. One of them had a pending patent that was tangentially related to Solara's technology. It was a minor asset, almost worthless on its own. But if he could create a legal challenge, a claim of patent infringement, he could tie up the Sterling acquisition in court for months. It would be a nuisance, a costly delay, but it would force her to the table. It would force her to finally speak to him. He filed the injunction, a desperate, spiteful move born of a bruised ego. He didn't want to win. He wanted to be noticed. He wanted to prove he could still affect her world, that he wasn't entirely powerless. The news of the injunction reached Claire's desk on a Tuesday morning. Her legal team presented it as a minor, albeit annoying, obstacle. "It's a frivolous claim," her head of legal said, "clearly designed to be a thorn in our side. We'll file a motion to dismiss, but it will delay the closing by at least a quarter." Claire stared at the legal document, at Damien's name at the bottom. The blood drained from her face. This was different. The silence, the gossip, the cold shoulders. That was the passive fallout of his actions. This was a direct, calculated attack. He wasn't just haunting her past, he was actively trying to sabotage her future. He was using a memory of her trust, a project she had shared with him in confidence, as a weapon against her. The personal nature of the betrayal was staggering. It wasn't business, it was cruelty. Any lingering flicker of sympathy she might have felt for him was extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She cancelled her afternoon meetings and drove to her father's estate an hour outside the city. She found him in his library, a vast book-lined room that smelled of old leather and wood smoke. She laid the injunction on his desk without a word. Arthur read it, his expression hardening. "The desperate act of a desperate man," he said, his voice a low growl. "He's trying to drag you into the mud with him." "He's using something I shared with him," Claire said, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "He's trying to punish me for leaving my life with him behind." "So what will you do?" Arthur asked, his eyes searching hers. "We can crush him. Our legal team can countersue him into oblivion. We can leak his firm's precarious financial state to the press. By the time we're done, he won't be able to get a loan for a cup of coffee." Claire looked out the window at the sprawling, manicured gardens. The path her father was offering was tempting. The idea of retribution, of making Damien feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused her, was a siren song. She could ruin him, completely and utterly. She could become the monster he had created. But then she thought of the past 7 years, the quiet compromises, the slow erosion of her identity, the way she had contorted herself to fit into his life. Ruining him wouldn't erase that. It would only prove that he had succeeded in changing her, in remaking her in his own image, a ruthless player in a game of power. It would be a victory that felt like a defeat. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned back to her father. "No public fight, no leaks. That's his game. I'm not playing it." "Then what's your move?" A plan began to form in her mind, cold and precise. "He wants a meeting. He wants to force me to the table. Fine, I'll give him one, but it won't be the one he's expecting." She wasn't going to fight him on his terms. She was going to end this on hers. The unraveling was no longer something she would watch from a distance. She was going to personally pull the final thread. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a conference room in the offices of Sterling Global's primary law firm. The space was deliberately sterile and impersonal, all polished chrome, dark wood, and soundproofed glass, offering a panoramic view of a cold grey sky. It was a place for transactions, not reconciliations. Damien arrived first, dressed in a suit that was impeccably tailored but hung on a frame that had lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes, but his jaw was set with a defiant determination. He believed he had finally regained a measure of control. He had forced the Queen to acknowledge the pawn. He rehearsed his opening lines, a carefully crafted mix of contrition and business acumen designed to open a path back into her life. Claire entered precisely on time, flanked by 2 of her senior lawyers. She wasn't wearing a power suit. Instead, she chose a simple but elegant cream-colored dress. She looked calm, composed, and utterly untouchable. She offered no greeting, simply taking a seat at the opposite end of the long table, creating a vast, unbridgeable distance between them. "Damien," she began, her voice even and devoid of emotion. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to address your legal challenge directly to save everyone's time." Damien leaned forward, ready to launch into his speech. "Claire, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This was never about hurting you. It was the only way I could get you to talk to me. We need to—" She held up a hand, a small, simple gesture that silenced him instantly. "Let me be clear. There is no we. There is your company, and there is mine. And you have filed a frivolous bad faith injunction against my company. Is that correct?" Her lawyer slid a folder across the table toward Damien. He opened it. Inside were detailed depositions, financial analyses, and technical reports from independent experts, all systematically dismantling his patent claim. It was an overwhelming display of legal firepower, assembled in a matter of days. "Our legal team estimates that defending against your claim would cost us approximately $2 million in fees and delay the acquisition by 6 months, Claire continued, her voice as cool as the glass walls. "Dismissing it would be easy, but I'm not interested in easy. I'm interested in final." Another lawyer slid a second folder toward him. This one was different. It was a share purchase agreement. "During our marriage," Claire said, "you often used my personal investment account to manage small-scale angel investments. One of those was a seed round investment in a digital logistics company, Logistream. You put in $50,000. I believe you called it a flyer." Damien stared at her, confused. What does that have to do with anything? Logistream was just acquired by Amazon, Claire said flatly. That $50,000 investment, which remained in an account under my name, is now worth approximately $28 million. The air left Damien's lungs. He had completely forgotten about it. A small investment made years ago, a footnote in his portfolio, now a staggering windfall. Her windfall. You have two options, Damien, Claire stated, leaning forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. Option A. You proceed with your injunction. We will countersue you not only for legal fees, but for damages related to the delay. We will subpoena every financial record from Archer Capital. We will expose the precarious state of your firm and your own professional misconduct. You will be ruined, publicly and permanently. By the time we are done, you will be bankrupt. She paused, letting the weight of the threat settle in the silent room. Or option B, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You sign this document which immediately withdraws your lawsuit. In exchange, I will sign this one. She slid a cashier's check across the table. It was made out to him. The amount was $5 million. Damien stared at the check, then back at her, his mind reeling. What? What is this? It is your share, Claire said. $28 million is a life-changing amount of money. I don't need it, but you do. The $5 million is a gesture of finality. It is the price for you to disappear from my life. You take the money, you drop the suit, and you never, ever contact me or my family again. This is the last transaction we will ever have. This was her choice. This was her redemption, not vengeance, not destruction. A clean, cold corporate buyout of his presence in her life. She was giving him an exit, a way to survive, but on the absolute condition that he vanish. It was a gesture of immense power and, in its own strange way, immense grace. She would not become him. She would not destroy for the sake of it. She would simply erase him. Damien looked at the check, then at the mountain of legal documents that promised his annihilation. He looked at Claire's face, searching for any flicker of the woman he once knew, the quiet, accommodating girl who had adored him. He found none. He was looking at Claire Sterling, and she was closing an account. Slowly, his hand trembling, he picked up a pen and signed the withdrawal document. He had walked in thinking he was a player in the game. He now understood he was just a piece being moved off the board. Claire took the signed paper, stood up, and walked to the door without a backward glance. Her lawyer pushed the check toward Damien. The funds are cleared, he said. Damien was left alone in the silent room, the $5 million check lying on the table like a consolation prize for the loss of an empire he never knew he'd had. He had money, but he had lost everything else. His firm, his reputation, his past, and his future. He was finally, utterly, alone with the hollow core Arthur Sterling had seen in him from the very beginning. Months passed. The chill of autumn gave way to the deep freeze of winter, and then, slowly, to the tentative warmth of spring. The city thawed, and with it, so did something inside Claire. The acquisition of Solara Innovations was a resounding success, placing Sterling Global at the forefront of the renewable energy sector. Claire threw herself into the work, her days filled with strategy sessions, site visits, and negotiations. She found a deep, abiding satisfaction in building something real and lasting, something that would have an impact beyond a balance sheet. She was good at it. More than good, she was exceptional. The quiet competence she had once used to manage Damien's life was now being applied on a global scale. She never heard from Damien again. True to their final transaction, he had vanished. She heard whispers through the grapevine that he had sold his remaining stake in Archer Capital for a fraction of its former value and moved out of New York, some said to California, others to Europe. He had taken the money and disappeared, a ghost with a golden parachute. She didn't hate him anymore. The anger, the pain, the bitterness, they had receded, leaving behind a scar that was no longer tender to the touch. It was simply a part of her history, a reminder of a lesson learned at a great cost. She had come to understand that her redemption wasn't about his downfall, but about her own rise. It wasn't about proving him wrong, it was about proving herself right. One sunny Saturday afternoon in May, she found herself walking through a part of the city she hadn't visited in years, the small, tree-lined West Village street where she and Damien had lived in their first apartment. It was a charming, modest place they had rented when he was just starting out, full of mismatched furniture and ambitious dreams. She stood across the street, looking up at the window of what was once their living room. She remembered nights spent on the floor with takeout containers, mapping out his business plan on napkins. She remembered his excitement, his drive, and yes, his love. It had been real in its own way before it was corroded by ambition and insecurity. She felt a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance of the past. That young woman who had lived in that apartment, so full of hope and willing to sacrifice everything for the man she loved, was not a fool. She was just a different version of the woman she was today. She had needed to lose herself completely to finally, truly find herself. A young couple walked out of the building, laughing, their hands intertwined. Claire smiled. She felt no envy, no sadness, just a quiet sense of detachment, that life was a photograph in an album she no longer needed to open. She turned away from the building and continued her walk, her destination a small, independent art gallery a few blocks away. It was the kind of place she had always loved, but that Damien had found unimpressive. Inside, the gallery was bright and airy, filled with the vibrant, challenging work of emerging artists. She moved through the space not as Claire Sterling, the heiress, or as a member of the board, but just as Claire. She felt a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't performing, she wasn't negotiating, she was simply being. In the final room, a large canvas caught her eye. It was an abstract piece, a swirl of deep blues, fiery oranges, and at the very center, a resilient, brilliant splash of gold shining through the chaos. It was titled simply, Horizon. She stood before it for a long time, captivated. It was a painting of a storm, but also of the dawn that follows. It was about wreckage, but more than that, it was about what you build afterward. She bought the painting. As she walked out of the gallery and into the warm afternoon sun, she felt the last of the shadows recede. Damien had taken her past, but in doing so, he had given her back her future, a future that was unwritten, a horizon that was vast and open and entirely her own. She was not defined by the man who left her, nor by the name she had inherited. She was defined by the choices she made now. And for the first time, she felt utterly, completely, and gloriously free. And so Claire Sterling walked back into the sunlight, not as a woman scorned, but as a woman reborn. She proved that the greatest power isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who you should be. What did you think of Claire's final move? Was it true redemption, or should she have taken Damien for everything he had? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and transformation, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Thank you for watching.